Hello and welcome to the NAGDA Benchmarking Measuring Success webinar. I'm Tim Coyne, Retirement Program Manager for the State University of New York and NAGDA's Benchmarking Committee Chair. I'll be moderating today's webinar. For those of you in the path of this spring nor'easter, I hope you're doing well and are appropriately hunkered down and able to enjoy the webinar. This is NAGDA's first webinar for 2018, and this is the first webinar being conducted by the Benchmarking Committee, which is in its inaugural year. The Benchmarking Committee is seeking to increase participation in the annual survey and usage of the online benchmarking portal by members. Please note that the survey will be available as of April 1st, approximately April 1st, for plan sponsors to go in and complete. There's a lot of really good information that's captured in the survey that members can use to ideally improve their plans, so we encourage you to take advantage of the portal and complete the survey. We hope that you find today's webinar informative and substantive, and that it encourages you to participate in this year's benchmarking survey. Not only can the survey help you with your plans, but it also enables NAGDA to be more responsive to our needs as plans and plan sponsors. Before we get started with the presentation, we want to let you know about a few housekeeping items. First, we politely ask that you remain muted throughout the call so the presentation is not interrupted. We have designated time at the end of the presentation for a question and answer period. Throughout the webinar, you may submit questions through the Q&A pod that you should see on the right of the presentation. To do so, just simply type your question in that Q&A pod in the open area and click the comment bubbles to submit, and we should be able to see it. The PowerPoint presentation for today's webcast has been posted to the NAGDA website. If you would like a hard copy of the PowerPoint, you can access it on the nagda.org on the webinars page under News and Events. Before we get started, NAGDA would like to thank the 2018 webinar sponsors. Thanks to these sponsors, NAGDA is able to continue providing members with valuable education opportunities such as this webinar. The webinar sponsors include Artisan Partners, AXA, Empower, ICMA-RC, Invesco, Lincoln Financial Group, Mass Mutual, Nationwide, Prudential, Siegel Consulting, TIAA, Valak, and Voya. We are grateful for the support of these industry sponsors. NAGDA is also pleased to offer one continuing education credit for this webinar. In order to receive credit, please be sure you are logged into the webinar under the email address you are registered with. A continuing education credit certificate, will be emailed to those who selected to receive the credit when they registered for the webinar. And now to introduce today's speakers. I'd like to welcome our three speakers for today's presentation. We are fortunate to have three presenters today, each representing different perspectives on benchmarking and how plans can use benchmarking, especially the NAGDA survey, to measure success. We have with us Michaeli O'Connor. And Michaeli is actually based in New York City and braved the nor'easter today. So a special thank you to Michaeli for joining us today. Michaeli is a consultant with RVK's Defined Contribution Practice and is a core member of the firm's Defined Contribution Solutions Group. Michaeli also serves as the NAGDA Benchmarking Committee's Vice Chair. We also want to welcome Ryan McCoy. Ryan is getting pounded by the nor'easter today too as well, so we want to thank Ryan for making the effort to join the call today. Ryan is the Chief of Deferred Compensation for the Pennsylvania State Employees Retirement System. In this role, Ryan is responsible for producing all financial reporting for the Pennsylvania SERS 457B plan, reviewing and approving marketing of the plan, producing financial and demographic reports, and analysis for the Pennsylvania SERS Board of Directors and the CFO, and maintaining SERS relationship with their third-party administrator. Ryan is also a valuable member of the Benchmarking Committee. Lastly, we have Paul Beddoe, NAGDA's Government Affairs Director. He will be discussing the importance of NAGDA's data to legislative affairs and will also be providing a legislative update. Each presentation will be approximately 10 to 15 minutes in length, followed by 10 minutes for a Q&A at the conclusion of the presentation. At this time, I'm going to turn it over to Michaeli to begin our program.
Great. Thank you, Tim, for the introduction. And I'd also like to thank NAGDA for having me here on today's webinar. My goal today is really to discuss what types of information is included in the NAGDA's Perspectives in Practice survey, how this data and information can be used, and then I'm going to walk through some examples of situations or questions that may come up where the NAGDA benchmarking information may be useful. So with that, let me spend just a few minutes discussing the information covered in the survey. The NAGDA survey is really designed to be quite comprehensive and cover all aspects of the public DC program. It starts with questions that aim at accurately defining the survey population and many of the potential differentiators within the public DC space, such as plan type, size and assets and number of participants, plan designation, whether the plan is a primary or supplemental plan, single versus say, multi-employer plans. It addresses coverage, whether the plan is for state employees or say county or city employees. And if the plan is only available to plans to participants or if there are competing plans available within the area. The survey also includes information covering eligibility and enrollment practices and contribution options, including Roth, as well as a section on withdrawals and distributions. The section on investments includes questions about the default option, types of investments available to participants, including both active and passive funds, how the plan's assets are allocated, and utilization and implementation of white label funds. The survey takes a pretty deep dive into participant services and engagement practices and asks respondents to provide information about their plan oversight and government practices. And finally, as one would expect, there is definitely a section on fees that cover both investment management as well as plan administration and individual participant transaction fees. I'm now going to turn to how the NAGDA benchmarking survey data can be used. And while a plan may differ in terms of its unique characteristics, goals, size, or complexity, benchmarking survey data information can provide you with a way to identify similarities and differences to your peers or even strengths and weaknesses. And it really can assist you with researching ways to enhance your plan or for the industry members on the line, enhance your client's plans. I would say it's often used to help educate board or committee members as a way to help them make decisions. And, I've been in many boardrooms where I hear, what are other public DC plans doing in this space? Well, having benchmarking data can be very useful in those situations. It can be useful in assisting with fee or service negotiations with your record keeper and or RFP processes because it can help establish or identify the areas where you should possibly push for additional services or lower costs. And then as a consultant, I find the ability to track this type of information and see what trends are emerging within the government DC space is extremely valuable to our consulting practice and most importantly, our clients. The last point I'd make before diving into some examples that I'd like to go through is that the process of filling out the survey in and of itself may actually be a useful exercise to better understanding your plan. And I've helped, many clients fill out surveys over the years, and oftentimes there is a valuable learning experience going through the process. Now, I recognize that the NAGDA Perspectives and Practice Survey is a fairly lengthy survey that does take time, but the benefits do support the time required to complete it. At least that's what I believe. So let's start with the first example. Let's say you, as a plan sponsor or even a consultant working with a plan sponsor, has a goal of increasing plan participation. While there are likely going to be many steps involved in reaching this goal, I've listed a few questions that I believe are useful in addressing, which include questions such as, is my plan's participation rate consistent with my peers? What is a reasonable goal to set for a participation rate? And what are other plans doing to help increase participation? Well, what you see here in the table is information that I extracted from the NAGDA Perspectives and Practice Survey from last year. In addition to comparing your plan to all plans, you can choose to select more specific peer groups that may offer a more apples-to-apples comparison, which for today's examples, I've selected 3 additional peer groups: the single employer, 457B plans, and then plans with 300 to 700 million in assets. So what information from the survey can help me answer these 3 questions? Well, areas such as plan participation rates. You can actually see how different the results are within the more specific peer groups. Again, hopefully this will provide a better comparison to your specific plan. To help answer the question of how others are increasing participation, information about auto-enrollment and what are the considerations or challenges that may exist with implementing auto-enrollment. And lastly, is it common to establish goals for enrollment and participation? If so, and it definitely seems apparent with the data before us, then maybe there's an opportunity to reach out to other NAGDA plan sponsor members or even industry members to learn more about how they are establishing their goals. So the next example is really addressing the goal of simplifying the investment menu. Again, while they're generally, this process requires a comprehensive and thorough analysis, questions that may be useful in asking include, how many options do my peers generally offer their participants? What percentage of my peers use white label funds, and how are they structuring those funds? Is it common to offer mutual funds, collective trusts, and/or separate accounts? Similar to the last example, we've got a list of data points and results for all plans as well as specific peer groups here. There's definitely more information available to help answer these questions within the NAGDA survey, but I've just extracted a few, primarily just focused on the number of funds and utilization of white label strategies as just an example. But you can see that while many of the plans within the survey offer white label funds, as referenced by the 43 or 42.9% who selected yes, when you drill down to the plans with, say, 300 to 700 million in assets, you see a slightly different story, where it's maybe less common to use white label funds. So this type of benchmarking information may not necessarily drive your decisions as it relates to simplifying your investment menu, but it is definitely helpful to understand how similar or different you may be to your peers and why that may be. Another example that I've addressed with clients over the years is whether or not to offer a brokerage window, or should changes or adjustments be made to the current brokerage window. So typical questions that you may want to ask as part of a research effort, it could include, how common is it to offer one? How much utilization is typical? What are the fees charged or the operational considerations that I need to be aware of? Again, from the survey, there's actually a section on self-directed brokerage windows that include whether or not you offer it, the percentage of assets and participants who use it, as well as some fee information. And while it appears that it is common to offer brokerage windows, as referenced by the first couple lines in the table, we see both from an asset and a participant count perspective that utilization of this offering tends to be fairly low. Again, this information may be useful in supplementing your own research, whether you're evaluating brokerage windows or considering making adjustments to your current offering. Now, I've got one last example that I've included for today, and it's focused on fees and the goal of better understanding how your plan's fees compare. Again, questions that I would suggest asking include, what are the common methods of charging participants for administration? How do our investment management and administrative fees compare to peers? Why Would our fees maybe be higher or lower than our peers? Should we be charging our participants for additional services? And what are the common fees associated with those services? Now, keep in mind that there are maybe multiple reasons why your plan fees differ from your peers, but trying to understand the cost drivers and the reasons for the differences is a healthy and a prudent practice. So I've extracted some fee data from the NAGDA benchmarking survey that includes, how fees are being charged to participants, whether that's a direct dollar fee, an asset-based fee, or even the use of revenue sharing. I've included the total investment and total administrative costs, as well as a few data points that may be useful in better understanding your cost drivers, such as the investment vehicles used, whether that is mutual funds, collective trusts, or separate accounts, and how you compare to your peers in that investment vehicle utilization. And then also looking at the services that you require from your TPA and how that differs from your peers, because we know that services should align with the fees that you're paying. I'd also add that you can review how your plan's assets are being invested, which can provide insight into potentially why your investment costs may be higher or lower than your peers. Reviewing your active versus passive breakdown, or concentration in certain asset classes such as stable value. So before I hand it over to Ryan, I would just like to reiterate that there are a variety of ways that benchmarking information can be used and leveraged, and it's not always known when you may want this type of information in the future. And so I would encourage all plan sponsors to participate in this year's survey so that we can collectively have better and more useful information about the government DC plan space. So with that, Ryan, you want to take it over?
Thanks, McKaylee. As Tim stated earlier, my name is Ryan McCoy. I am the Chief of Deferred Compensation for the Pennsylvania State Employees Retirement System. My primary roles in this agency are to prepare financial reporting, approve and assist in developing the marketing materials that are released for our 457 plan, tax reporting such as completion of the 945 and reconciliation of the 1099s, maintaining a relationship with our third-party administrator, creating different marketing campaigns for the 457 plan, as well as other various tasks that help the plan function well. Today I'm going to be talking about the completion of the benchmarking survey from a plan sponsor perspective. As everybody here probably already knows, the more data that's provided, the better and more useful the survey results are going to be. I know the first year that I completed this survey, questions were tied to answers from other questions, and because how my plan had to merge reports and different data points, this made completing the survey very frustrating. As McKaylee mentioned earlier, it's a very deep survey, kind of intimidating. But from year to year, a lot of that has been resolved. Now you can leave questions blank if you don't have the data to answer the questions. If, like I said, the questions aren't linked before, so before the logic in the questions would try to check your answers for you, and now you can actually submit answers whether or not the survey agrees with your calculations. First off, I'm going to go over my approach to completing the survey. Having done it for a few years, I've kind of narrowed it down to a science, and I hope this may help some of you if you're not already doing what I do. But the first thing I do is print out the survey prior to completing. I use a wide range of sources when compiling the answers for this survey. This helps me look at the survey in its entirety. instead of trying to populate all the answers section by section in the web browser. A lot of the survey questions open up based on how you answer the initial questions, and by printing out the survey, the user can then see all the questions contained within the survey. So I find that very helpful. And there's actually a link once you log into the survey that will allow you to download a PDF version of the survey that has all the answers opened up. The next thing that I do is I build templates for the questions that require data manipulation. Using Microsoft Excel, I'll create tables for a lot of the demographic questions, the questions that want to segregate data into, for instance, different age buckets or whatnot. And then this is a good home for all the source data that I have to use to populate the answers. So I have it all in one place. And simultaneously, I work with our third-party administrator to acquire some of the necessary data prior to completing the survey. Some of the reports that I use to populate answers in this survey are very large. It's often necessary to ask our TPA to pull the reports for me and send them via a secure website because trying to download it from the report generator just does not work. And then after I build all the tables and I've gone through the printed version of the survey and answered all the questions, I will then log into the survey to populate the data. Also, you'll note once you're in the survey, I think this is new as of last year maybe, NAGDA has provided pop-ups if you hover above messages that will kind of guide you to what the survey is actually looking for. If you're unsure what the data point being asked for means, pay attention because that is very helpful. Also, in my experience, the survey team with NAGDA is very personable. I've had to contact them for issues trying to submit the data for the survey. They've helped me with how to populate answers and so forth. Like I said, they've been really increasing the usability of this survey throughout the years. Next, I'm going to talk about some of the hurdles, which I kind of touched on before, but some survey calculations, as I mentioned previously, it used to check the data. Now that this has been done away with, that's great because with the data merging and data manipulation I have to do, it's just hard to get a consistent answer with what the formula wants you to do. I do my best and work with all the data at my disposal to come up with the best, the most accurate answers that I can. And that leads me to my next hurdle, which is data inconsistencies. And some of this is due to timing differences. The data that we use from our information system at SIRS doesn't match with the data that's contained within our TPA's information system. For instance, our TPA's active member number represents people actively contributing to their 457 plan, whereas our active participant number reflects all members who are currently employed with the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. So I can't just get all my answers from one place, and that requires some effort. And my next hurdle is time constraints. Our year-end at SIRS is 12/31, so a lot of times I find myself trying to balance year-end reporting mixed with our annual audit and then completing the survey. And, the data that this survey produces is just invaluable to us, so I just do what I have to and work diligently to make sure that I'm able to complete it on time. And the last thing I want to touch on in terms of a hurdle is the lack of available data. I noticed that some questions within the survey are difficult to answer just due to the fact that we're not tracking the necessary data points. And NAGDA has become very understanding of this and have made it, once again, so you can submit answers that aren't fully completed just so they can grasp some of the data. And then this leads me on to my next topic, which is how we use the survey results. one thing that I do, every year I create a presentation for our CFO to use when he presents our plan to the board of directors. And this presentation highlights all of the financial reporting and demographical information related to our 457 plan from the year that we just completed, as well as stemming back into the past. And the survey results provide averages that allow us to show our management where we stand against the rest of the defined contribution community, which, once again, I can't reiterate enough, is such a great tool. It really puts things into perspective. Also, by completing the survey as an added benefit, the data points that we create for the benchmarking survey can also be carried over into our in-house demographic reports that we create every year. So by means of populating the survey, a lot of heavy lifting is done in regards to report acquisition from the TPA and data manipulation. And lastly, it really helps us benchmark for our plan initiatives. As discussed above, we use relevant data from the survey to see how we hold up against the industry. The survey also benefits us by means of our consultants, which we use RVK, and specifically McKaylee helps us out. So she's actually used the survey results to help our defined contribution committee establish goals, and one of those goals recently decided was that we should look into increasing our enrollment in our 457 plan. And they were able to take that data from the survey related to our plan and ultimately help us come up with a goal matrix to use as a starting point. So the survey works as a tool that benefits several types of industries within the defined contribution community. And here at CSRS, we are able to benefit from the survey directly as well as indirectly. And like I said before, the more the plans populate, the more plans that populate the data survey, the better the data becomes and the more accurate the data points are. And McKaylee touched on this as well, but completing the survey from year to year allows us to see how we are improving in key areas, or as well as falling behind in some key areas. So it's important for us to track because focusing efforts to improve one area may actually cause another area to suffer. And if you don't collect the data and analyze it, you won't know that the problem's occurring. So we, like I said before, we can't reiterate from a plan perspective how valuable this data is. It's so hard to go out and try to find this kind of data just from, Googling or using the internet. Yeah, it's a great tool, and if we didn't have it, it would be a lot more work to go out and try to find these data points. So that's pretty much all I have from a plan perspective point of view. Paul can take it from here on out to go into his legislative update. I thank you guys for your time.
Thanks, Tim. Paul Beddoe here, your representative in Washington, D.C. So I am thrilled to be representing NAGDA here in our nation's capital. This morning, or this afternoon rather, what I'd like to do is review how NAGDA's priorities fared in the tax bill that passed at the end of last year. And I'd also like to explain how we use the benchmarking survey in advocating for NAGDA's priorities in that legislation. Then I'll update you on the 2018 legislative priorities that were just approved by NAGDA's executive committee, and then we'll give you a little outlook for those priorities for the rest of the year here in DC. So with that. So last year, we had a brand new administration, a brand new majority, Republican majority in both houses of Congress, and there was a lot of focus early on in what this new Republican majority was going to do in terms of policy. The first thing that they took up, as you all remember, was the effort to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act, or Obamacare. But even while that debate was going on, as early as last spring, we started to hear about the plans for a major piece of tax legislation. There hadn't been an update to the tax code since really 1986. So it's almost like a once-in-a-generation ambition to overhaul the tax code, simplify it, and give people a major tax cut, both for individuals and families as well as for companies. So with that ambition, we started to hear that there would also be some retirement features that could be on the table, and some of the things that we were hearing were very, very concerning. And for example, one of the ideas that was beginning to be floating around was something that they were calling Rothification. That would be mandating that a percentage of contributions to retirement accounts would have to be after tax rather than before tax, really changing and making a major structural change to our defined contribution plans. Other concepts more loosely described as consolidation, plan consolidation or simplification, where there were experts that think that there are too many different kinds of governmental defined contribution plans, and we needed to simplify all those different plan characteristics, maybe moving towards more consistent characteristics. When we started hearing these things, NAGDA immediately started working to explain why those would be problematic and could actually have the effect of discouraging people from participating in planning and saving for retirement. And NAGDA worked with key allies on Capitol Hill, two of whom are pictured here. Senator Rob Portman, Republican from Ohio, and Senator Ben Cardin, Democrat from Maryland, both senators are on the Senate Finance Committee, which is the committee that has jurisdiction over all of retirement. So NAGDA was engaging with Senator Portman and Senator Cardin throughout the summer and into the fall, and we were fortunate that NAGDA's president, Keith Overly, was a constituent of Senator Portman's and running the Ohio Deferred Compensation Plan. So that was very helpful, and we had great access to Senator Portman, and we knew that they were on our side. And so as we were working through the summer with allies, both here in Washington and on the Hill, we were looking for to try to forestall or keep these bad ideas from making their way into the legislation. But we really had every expectation that the legislation that would be introduced in the House of Representatives would include Rothification and some consolidation provisions. And as it happened, though, when the House bill was released in the fall, it didn't include any of these major changes to governmental DC plans that we had feared. So we were kind of feeling pretty good about things. And then as the bill worked its way through the House of Representatives and then went over to the Senate, we were feeling like we were in pretty good shape. And then unexpectedly, we ended up having the Senate bill being released, the first draft of the Senate bill that was going to be considered by the Finance Committee, and it actually ended up including a bunch of harmful provisions to DC plans, including a provision that would have eliminated 457B's exemption from the 10% penalty for early distribution, and it also would have eliminated the special catch-up rules that our plans participants are able to employ later in their career to bump up their account balances. So we were obviously very concerned, and our allies kicked into gear. And in fact, Senator Portman and Senator Cardin both offered amendments to delete those provisions, and were successful in eliminating some of those the provision to delete the exemption from the 10% penalty in the Finance Committee. And as the bill went forward, it passed out of the Finance Committee, but it still had some of the harmful consolidation rules, including the elimination of the special catch-up rules. And that's where Senator Collins came into play. Senator Collins was one of the final deal makers on one of the final votes that they were needed to get the bill out of the Senate. And she insisted that the final bill delete all of those harmful provisions for governmental DC plans. Now, how does the benchmarking survey come into it? Well, the reason that the benchmarking survey comes into it is that the information that we gathered in the benchmarking survey was an important part of our argument that we made to the Hill. For example, we were able to avoid having Rothification included in this legislation because we were able to show and make the case that while 64% of our plans offer a Roth option, only 0.03% of assets were Roth assets. So that really was a very compelling argument that people really rely on that tax deferral as an incentive to save. We also made the case that there was no reason to get rid of the exemption from the 10% penalty because only about 1.3% of total plan assets are being withdrawn annually by participants before the age of 60. So the flexibility is an important incentive to save, gives people a sense of comfort, but it really doesn't result in a lot of leakage. And finally, on the consolidation provision, for example, the eliminating special catch-up rules, that wasn't part of the benchmarking survey, but NAGDA members responded to survey questions that we put out into the field as we were trying to explain to members of Congress how the special catch-up rules actually work in practice. So the responsiveness of NAGDA members to surveys really was helpful. And in fact, our allies have told us repeatedly that they were really appreciated NAGDA's input, and part of that was that it was data-based, it was reality-based. So just last week, NAGDA's executive board was in Washington, and they approved the final 2018 legislative priorities for our organization and actually carried them to the Hill. And these priorities include passing a resolution to support National Retirement Security Week. Once again, we're going to carry that forward to give you an opportunity to highlight the importance of participating in planning for your own retirement security. We also are going to highlight the importance of preserving these unique plan features. For example, saying that we really don't want Rothification, we don't want plan consolidation for no reason, and we want to retain the exemption from the 10% penalty for early distribution, and we want to retain the special catch-up provisions. And that's all in response to the fights that we had in the tax bill. And you know, the enormous achievement was that we avoided any of those bad things happening, but once those ideas are kind of out there, they could come back, and I'll talk a little bit more about that later. We also have a new priority this year. We want to allow qualifying charitable contribution or distributions from governmental DC plans as are permitted from Roth IRAs. And then we have some priorities that we've also renewed from previous years on building Roth responsiveness. For example, allowing Roth 457s, 401ks, and 401as and 403b plan participants to roll assets from Roth IRAs into their plans, to exempt designated Roth contributions from required minimum distribution rules, like is currently allowed from Roth, and to allow the use of designated Roth assets to roll into 401a plans for the purchase of service credits. And then under enhanced administrative efficiency, these are some of the ideas that we've had for a while about getting rid of the first day of the month rule, and also allowing non-spousal beneficiaries to roll assets into our plans. So those are the things that we're going to be advocating for going forward. Now, what is the chance for getting that done? Well, here's kind of the state of play. I think a lot of the ideas that we have would be well received on the Hill, but Congress can only manage so much at a time, and right now there's a lot of retirement stuff on its plate. The first thing is a brand new Joint Select Committee on the Solvency of Multi-Employer Pension Plans, and this is a committee that was authorized by the Budget Act that was enacted in February, and it sets up a committee with equal numbers of Republican and Democratic senators and representatives, and they're charged with coming up with recommendations by November 30th, and those recommendations for those multi-employer DB plans would be given kind of a special expedited process to get through Congress if this committee can reach agreement. And the committee goes away at the end of December, and politically, I think it's a really important thing for a lot of these members. You'll notice a bunch of members from both parties coming from the Midwest, where apparently a lot of these plans are in crisis. So it's important, especially for those senators from states where those plans are important as they're up for re-election. So a lot of energy is going to be spent working on this multi-employer pension issue. There's another bill, a bipartisan piece of legislation that came out of the Senate Finance Committee. It was actually passed the Senate Finance Committee last year in the previous Congress, called the Retirement Enhancement and Savings Act of 2018, and the bill that passed last year was the same thing, but of 2017. And what we think, this bill is like I said, it's bipartisan. They want to get it out of the Senate. It's come out of the Finance Committee unanimously, but any new legislation on retirement is going to have to come after Senator Wyden and Senator Hatch's bill. So I mentioned potential new legislation, and our champions, Senator Portman and Senator Cardin, both have told us and told the board when we were in seeing them this last week that they would like to do a new bill and include some of NAGDA's priorities, but we're going to have to see if we can get RESA, the Retirement Enhancement and Savings Act, through the Congress before this can happen. So that is kind of the state of play there. I think there's a great opportunity and a great interest in doing legislation in the retirement space, but we're in line behind some other kind of issues that may take up the Congress's ability to focus. So what's next? I guess what I would ask from you guys is, like all the speakers, is this survey has been very valuable, and the data that's generated is very helpful to us as we're making the case for your priorities on Capitol Hill. So please do the survey. And then when there are other surveys that go out, smaller, more targeted issues, like we did on the special catch-up rules, please respond to those as well. It's so helpful to be able to go to the Hill with information that reflects the reality on the ground and what you're seeing in your own participants and your own plans. And then finally, think about using the benchmarking survey when it comes out next year to engage with your member of Congress and to use the data to show what you're doing and what's going on nationally, and kind of raise the profile of your plan and the work that you do, and also of NAGDA. So with that, I will pass it back.
Thank you, Paul, and thank you, McKaylee and Ryan. We appreciate your time today and the information that you shared about about the value of NAGDA's benchmarking data. I hope that folks have found this to be a valuable use of time and have enjoyed this as an introduction to this year's survey. So now we're going to be opening up the webinar to some Q&As. However, before we begin taking questions, I'd like to just quickly ask that our attendees take a few minutes at the conclusion of the webinar today to share feedback on today's event. That feedback helps us and helps NAGDA make sure that our programming is addressing issues that you guys are near and dear to you and your plans, and helps us really plan for the year so that we're an active and engaged organization. So we definitely appreciate that. So you can access the evaluation by clicking the link that you see on the current slide. The link will also be shared again. Will be shared again on the final slide of the presentation. So I thank you in advance for taking the time to complete the evaluation. Great. So as we move into our Q&A time, I just want to remind you that you may submit questions using the Q&A pod that you should see to the right of the presentation. Should be pretty simple. Just type your question into the open area and click the comment bubble to submit. We will definitely try to answer as many questions as time allows. We've got a good chunk of time left, so we are ready to get going with those questions. As questions are coming in, what I'd like to do is invite the presenters to share any additional thoughts that you may have as you reflect on the discussion so far as well. So that being said, let's take a look at the questions from the audience. Okay. So maybe what I will do is to help kick us off into to piggyback on Paul's conversation is I'll start by asking a question of Paul. So Paul, how would you suggest that us plan sponsors and even the consultants and industry folks on the call, how do you suggest that we use the benchmarking survey and the data to engage our legislators?
Thanks, Tim. I think one of the things I think would be really useful is to think about using National Retirement Security Week as an opportunity to invite your member of Congress or your senator to an event that you could plan, perhaps with your board, to brief policymakers about retirement security, and you could use the data as a way of highlighting what you're doing in your own plan and compare it to national data and talk about some of the big picture issues around promoting retirement security in your workforce and in your state and locality. So I think that would be a great way to do it. Members of Congress could be invited perhaps to give remarks. They like to do that, and especially if they're have supported, for example, the National Retirement Security Week resolution in the past, or have been, have demonstrated an interest in retirement. If they serve on the Finance Committee or the House Ways and Means Committee, the Senate Health Committee, these would be good targets to just kind of raise the profile of what you're doing and educate them a little bit and create some positive momentum. So I think National Retirement Security Week event using the data as part of the presentation, I think would be a good idea.
And thanks, Paul. That's really helpful and very good guidance. Just to follow up, for those of us who perhaps haven't engaged our legislators before, from a practical perspective, how would a plan sponsor go about during saying letting their legislators know that they were planning events around National Retirement Security Week, or even what some of the positive outcomes or that they have seen recently? Is the best way to just get in touch with that, like, let's say your local congressperson's office, or how would you recommend that folks go about that?
Great question. Every member of Congress, every senator maintains at least one district office in their home district, or around their home state in the case of senators. And those district staff are really the members' eyes and ears on the ground at home with the constituents. And so they are always very interested in hearing from the state and local government officials in the state. So it would be a matter of reaching out to that state office and giving yourself plenty of time. The scheduling requires time, so usually I would say 6 to 8 weeks in advance is a good kind of a target window to get on a calendar, if not before, and just engage with the staff there in that local office. That would be the place to start. And I would be more than happy to consult individually with you if you're thinking about doing something like this. And you can send get a hold of me through NAGDA.
Thanks, Paul. That's excellent advice. And what I would also encourage, any plan sponsors who do have like a effective program of outreach and engagement with their legislators. Maybe if you want to, either let Paul know, send him an email, or even post that to the NAGDA community. That'd be a really helpful learning opportunity for a lot of plan sponsors who might be looking to do so, but just haven't had occasion yet, or are not even sure, on how to go about it. So that is really, really fantastic. Thank you, Paul.
Yeah, and I would just throw in one additional idea: is use your board. I think that would be often your board members will be people who may have those political connections and may be able to help you do that as well. So that may be a thought.
Great, and thanks, Paul. So at this point, we're still waiting for some questions from the participants, but I'd like to track back to Ryan, because I think Ryan had some very good practical advice on how, as a plan sponsor, he goes about utilizing the benchmarking data and actually completing it, and some very important ways that in Pennsylvania SERS, that they actually use this benchmarking data. So I'd like to ask Ryan a question. Ryan, do you want to talk a little bit about the kind of information that the SERS board wants to be made aware of, and then what they're looking for the benchmarking data, what that helps them with?
Hi, Tim. Sure. I know recently they've been really wanting to dig into deferral increases, which I don't know that the survey specifically addresses at this point in time, but as being a member of the committee now, I now have a voice, so maybe that's something we could think about doing in the future. I know if they're wondering about that kind of statistic, maybe multiple plans are. Pretty much that ties into that would be the participation statistics. Sorry, I'm on a cell phone here, and I keep hearing a bunch of beeping going on, and I'm not sure if it's coming through, but yeah, they've been really looking into, deferral increases, seeing if we can increase enrollment in our plan, and any related statistic to those kind of, data points. Trying to think if there's anything else they've really been thinking about, but it's been mainly concentrating on membership and deferrals.
Sure. No, that's very helpful, right? I mean, one thing that you touched on during your part of the presentation was about the desire of the SERS board to increase participation in the Pennsylvania State 457B. Maybe can you talk a little bit about, as an overall initiative, how I know you touched on it during your presentation, but maybe to just provide some more detail on how you've been able to utilize the benchmarking data to sort of shape the Pennsylvania, the plan to increase participation?
Well, we've really just been comparing ourselves to other plans throughout the nation by looking at participation rates. Once again, like I think we're currently at a 37.5% participation rate amongst all eligible employees. I'm trying to think how we actually tie the data in. I know the data has been expressed to us, and we just kind of use it as like focusing points to, see where we're at now and to shoot for an objective going into the future. And this is something that's ongoing, so we're not really through that yet. But we've also been looking at opening our plan up to as many people as possible that the statute that enacted our plan allows. So really what we use the data for internally is really just a comparison to the other plans. And right now, it seems like we're pretty average. There's some other plans out there that we've found that have, higher rates, but they have things going on within their plans that we don't, such as automatic enrollment, and which ties again back to the survey. It shows us how many plans are utilizing such a device, so to speak, to get people enrolled. So anyway, I hope that was kind of substantive.
Yeah, no, that was very helpful, Ryan. So we do have a question from Krishna Jayaram. And I want to apologize if I butchered your last name. I tried not to. And the question, I'll throw this out. This is probably something, Michaeli, that you may be able to speak to, and Ryan, I think definitely you can touch on this as well. Krishna's indicated that they are new to NAGDA, and they're wondering how this data might be helpful for trying to determine internal staffing needs. So this is a very practical question. I'd be very curious, both Michaeli from a consulting perspective, and then Ryan as someone who's been doing the survey almost since it was initially released, like ways that you guys see that can be utilized in terms of resource allocation and staffing.
This is Michaeli. I'm not sure how well this particular survey would be able to be used for internal staffing resource needs. I think that there are some questions related to internal staff, but it doesn't necessarily go into too much detail. What I do think that it does offer, particularly within the kind of participant services and engagement area, is who is providing those types of services, whether it's your internal staff, whether it's your record keeper, or potentially some external party. And so you can see, compared to your peers, who are providing a variety of different services to your participants and whether that is the responsibility of internal staff. So that would be, one area of the survey that you could probably look at.
Thanks, Michaeli. That was helpful. Ryan, is there anything, sitting in your seat as the director of the Pennsylvania Deferred Compensation Plan, ways that you might utilize the survey to, in terms of resource allocation and staffing?
Well, not really. We're pretty much stuck at our complement, so we get the staff that we're allotted. So really, workload doesn't necessarily fall into any kind of, I guess something would really have to, I don't know, there'd have to be some kind of giant change for us to reevaluate our staffing. So this is nothing that we've ever really looked into currently or needed to. So, and I don't think there's anything in the survey that would really substantiate a need to, or a guide, so to speak, how to judge your staffing at your particular, plan. It just all depends on how your plan's set up and what goes on there. I don't see anything here that could tie into that.
Right. Well, Ryan, I think as government plan sponsors, we are all aware of the complement being the complement, regardless of what we're being asked to do or not. So, I think your response to that question is something that will resonate and that we all can relate to. So thank you, Ryan, Michaeli, and Paul. Thank you, Krishna, for your question. It's almost 4 o'clock, so I think that's about all the time that we've allocated for today. So we want to wrap up the webinar. Once again, I just want to finish by encouraging everyone who's on the call to reach out to the benchmarking committee with any additional questions or follow-up that you may have. This is the inaugural year of the committee, so we're still getting our feet under us. So we're very interested in feedback. Again, encourage you to keep your eyes peeled around April 1st for the release of the survey and to go in and complete it. On behalf of everyone today, I want to thank you all. I especially want to make sure I acknowledge the hard work that Tracy Tucker, Carly Miller, and the group at Association Management did to produce the survey today. They do a brilliant job, and none of this is possible without their work. Thank you again to the sponsors. And those of you in the path of this nor'easter, stay safe and be warm. Thanks, everyone.